Hello and welcome to Homemaking with Joy. My name is Rachel and I'd love to show you the process of making sourdough English muffins. It's a highly requested recipe. I make it with freshly milled grains. You can use all-purpose flour. Either way, they will be absolutely delicious. Let's get started. The original recipe comes from Amy Duska at Little Spoon Farm. She's a wonderful resource for lots of sourdough recipes, and because she uses grams in her measurements, I can very easily convert it to freshly milled flour. My first step though is to go back in time to this afternoon when I fed my sourdough starter. I like to feed it in the afternoon and then it is ready and bubbly by the evening when I'm here making my dough.
This is my sourdough starter out of the fridge. It still has some bubbles, but I need to feed it again, so it is ready for this evening. I don't have any all-purpose flour on hand, which is usually what I like to use, so I'm turning on my grain mill and I will grab some hard white wheat berries to feed my sourdough starter. I don't measure this part, I just dump some in the top and it generally works out just fine. I have a little helper with me in the kitchen. He's a big fan of using the grain mill and can do it usually by himself now. There is my flour in the bowl, and now I'm adding some water. Generally, it's equal parts flour and water mixed together to feed your sourdough starter. I don't measure, I just get it to about this consistency. It does turn out a little thicker with freshly milled flour, but works just the same. It is now evening. I have my hard white wheat berries and I'm going to measure out the correct number of grams necessary for this recipe. I appreciate using weight and grams, especially with freshly milled flour, because it's much more straightforward to measure the wheat berries in grams and then mill them through my mock mill. There they are, ready to go. There's my mock mill grain mill. I have it turned on. I'm going to take the lid off and dump the grains in the top. This is kind of noisy, but my kitchen is on the opposite end of the house as my kids, so with their sound machines on, this isn't too much of a problem. The flour comes out very fine, and I enjoy watching the process every time.
Now that my flour is milled, I can add the rest of the ingredients into my mixing bowl. For this recipe, you just put all the ingredients in here, mix it up, and let it sit overnight before you shape the English muffins. Very simple. You'll see I have my scale under here. One thing I like about Amy's recipes is that they use grams as well as volume measurements. It's one of the reasons that it's so simple to convert from freshly milled flour to all-purpose, or vice versa, I should say, with her recipes. You saw me measure out my grams of wheat berries, which comes out the exact same grams as flour, and then I know it's perfect for the recipes. So I'm going to put those extra ingredients in here, we'll mix it up, and then I'm off to bed.
My sourdough starter is nice and bubbly from being fed this afternoon. I enjoy using glass bowls so you can really appreciate those bubbles. I'm going to zero my scale and measure out the correct number of grams of sourdough starter. The next ingredient for this recipe is honey. This is the sweetener of choice that I'm using. You could also use maple syrup. Again, because this is in grams, you would just swap equal amounts of honey for maple syrup, or vice versa. Now I have my salt. I always use Redmond real salt in my kitchen. Here's the flour we milled earlier going into the bowl. The last ingredient to go in the English muffin dough tonight is some milk. If you use mason jars regularly, especially the half-gallon ones, I highly recommend these handles. They're very convenient and sturdy, makes it much easier to pour and store liquids in the fridge. This is what the inside of my bowl looks like with all of my ingredients in there. I'm going to put it on my mixer and start combining. I use the dough hook for this recipe, and I'm also going to add my lid on top so I don't get a huge explosion of flour.
As with most recipes that use freshly milled flour, we're going to just combine the ingredients and let them sit for a couple of minutes. This gives the freshly milled flour plenty of time to absorb all the liquids in the recipe. All-purpose flour absorbs them very quickly. Freshly milled flour takes a little bit more time. And by letting it sit and absorb, you'll get a more accurate representation of what your dough is like when you go to knead it. I will probably let this sit for about half an hour or just while I get chores done. I have some laundry to fold and some toys to pick up, and so whenever I get back to it, I will grab my camera and show you what the dough looks like after it has been kneaded. My dough has been sitting for a while and it is now ready to be kneaded. The recipe recommends kneading it for about 5 minutes on low speed. I'm not sure exactly how long I knead mine. I knead it until it looks good. So I will show you what that looks like and how I know along the way. Okay, let me give you my thoughts on this dough. I can see that it is all pulled away from the sides. It's in one coherent ball, which is a good thing. That tells me there's the correct ratio of flour and water. Now I need to pull off a little dough ball and check for the window pane test. Let me flip the camera around. I'm now going to check for the window pane test. This is to check on the gluten development in the bread dough. Gluten is a culinary term for the stretchy substance that forms when wheat is hydrated. It's what gives yeasted breads and what we would consider bread the texture that it has. The sourdough or the yeast create bubbles in the bread. That's what makes it rise, and we need that gluten to be the stretchy structure that holds on tight around those gas bubbles so your bread can rise. Or in this case, your English muffins. So I'm going to pull off some dough, just a chunk, and I'm going to stretch it, and the idea is that you can see through it like a window pane. You should be able to see light through it before it rips. So let's see. It's feeling pretty stretchy. I'm trying not to rip it. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. I don't know how to get you a good angle. Can you see my finger? The dough is pretty thin right there. Okay, eventually it will rip. Let me see if I can find another angle with some good backlight. Okay, this is not the most flattering angle for me, but it should help you see my dough. This is the light on my ceiling. So, let's try. Stretching. Come on now. Oh, there we go. See my finger moving behind the dough? It did rip a little bit. That's okay. It's bound to happen. It's just how far. There's my finger again. So, it's very stretchy. You can see through it. There's my finger again. And that tells me that there's gluten developed, and so I can put my lid on and let this rest overnight. My English muffin dough is in my mixer and ready to ferment overnight. I'm going to cover it with the lid that comes with my mixer. You can also use a wet tea towel. You can use plastic wrap or beeswax wrap. You just really don't want it to dry out overnight. If it gets a skin on the top of it, it's really hard to mix that in and you won't like your final product. So I'm going to put this on. And I wanted to say you can make this recipe without a mixer. It will require a little elbow grease. All that mixing I did in my mixer, you'd have to do by hand, but you can absolutely do that. I think the original recipe is written to make it by hand. I know the author doesn't like to make a lot of extra dirty dishes, but for me, it's well worth the time saver to do it in my mixer. So take that with you, and if you want to try it by hand, or if you need a good arm workout, maybe you can try that instead. But that is all I have to do for tonight, so I will see you in the morning. Good morning. My dough has been fermenting all night and I'm ready to make some English muffins. The next step in the process is to get the dough out and get it out to about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch thickness. Grab my biscuit cutter and make the shape of English muffins. So let's do it. This is what my dough looks like. Nicely puffed up. here's my dough out of my mixing bowl. I'm going to make a shape that's easy for cutting out. This recipe calls for a 1/2 inch thickness. I find better results with like 3/4 to 1 inch thickness. I think they cook better and feel more like English muffins. They're like thicker, so you can actually cut them. So that's fairly close to 1 inch. I use this part of my finger. Got my cutter. Cut it out of your dough. Looks like that. And then I have a baking sheet here. You can use a baking sheet or something else. Basically, it's just to hold the English muffins while they rise. But in order for them to not stick to the baking sheet, we have to put something on it. The recipe calls for cornmeal. And this is reminiscent of what they would put on store-bought English muffins as well. So I'm going to sprinkle this on my baking sheet. Grab my English muffin. And I put some on top and bottom. So it's covered. And I'll sit it there. And then the next one. Cut. I have these mats down to protect my countertop. If you have tougher countertops, you don't need those, but that's why I have those there. English muffin. Cornmeal. Ready to rise. And continue with that process. At this point, I don't have enough dough to make a whole circle, so I'm just going to squish it back together. I try not to knead it because I don't want to push out too many bubbles or anything, but I do just squish it back together. And these English muffins may not look as pretty as those, but they turn out just fine. So there are a couple like lines here where I squish the dough together, but it'll turn out okay. They are homemade and still way better quality, more delicious, and they will be more beautiful because you made them. So again, here's the overlap, but it'll be okay. And this is what I have left, so I'm just going to squish this into a circle shape. And it doesn't really matter what size it is, as long as it's the same thickness, because that is how they cook. So that'll be a cute little one for one of my kids. These are my finished English muffins. The next step is to cover them with a towel and let them rise for a bit. I do believe it's 1 hour till they get puffy, and then we will cook them on the stove. So the recipe says to let the English muffins rest for 1 hour so they can rise, get puffy before you bake them. However, I'm a little short on time this morning. So this trick works for all yeasted breads, all risen breads. I don't know if you can hear my kids playing, but they're fine. Anyway, so I turned the oven light on, only the light, and I put my English muffins inside. This works like a proofing box. It makes it just a little bit warmer than the regular air, and it helps them rise more quickly. You can buy fancy proofing boxes, but I'm not going to do that, and that wouldn't even fit in the proofing box. So just your light, not the heat, just the light provides enough warmth to warm up these English muffins or whatever bread dough and rise them a little more quickly. So instead of an hour, I'm about like 35 minutes. My English muffins have risen enough, and now we're ready to cook them. You don't bake them because it's on the stove, but cook them. So usually I like to use cast iron in my kitchen, but it's just too much of a wild card when it comes to temperature. So I like to use just a regular skillet. So do whatever you want, but that's what I like to use. It has to have a lid on it because that's how the inside of your English muffin gets cooked. The other thing is, usually I do a double batch of these, and a couple weeks ago when I was testing all of this, I did 3 double batches in 2 weeks. We had a ton of English muffins, but it helped me figure out how to cook them on this burner, on this stovetop. So I have a little sticky note on the back of my recipe card, and it says, on my left burner at level number 2 on the dial, the heat dial, the first side cooks for about 3 minutes and the second side cooks for about 2 minutes. And it's totally trial and error. You just have to figure it out. Or like, I know that the left burner on my stove is warmer, runs hotter than the right side of my stove. So like these numbers wouldn't even work on the right side of my stove. So when I tell you how I do this, take it loosely, and you have to figure it out. So maybe do 3 double batches in 2 weeks, and you will quickly figure it out. The other thing to note, the first round that you do on your skillet will not be the same as the rest of them. It takes time for your skillet to heat up, and so the first round, your skillet will not be as hot as following rounds, so you may have to adjust it slightly. What else? So the general process is, I warm up my skillet, I put my English muffins in. They already have the cornmeal on them and stuff, so I just put them in, they won't stick. And then I put the lid on. I set my timer for about 3 minutes and watch the first side. So you will see some steam in here, and that is to make sure the inside of the English muffin gets cooked. Ideally, when we flip them, the underside will be slightly brown, and then it'll cook on the other side, similar to a pancake, but maybe a little trickier because we've all made pancakes, but this is a little bit different. So I think that's all I have to tell you. Let's just get to it. I think generally it's not recommended to heat up an empty pan, but you'll see here I have it warming up, because if I put them in a cold pan, it just does not work at all. Here are my puffy English muffins. I don't know if you can tell on camera how much they've puffed up. Or you can see like this crack got bigger. That's where I kind of squished some of the dough together. It'll turn out just fine. Anyway, I'm excited to eat these. Okay, I'm gonna check. I can feel warmth coming off of my pan. And again, I'm in a little bit of a time crunch, so let's do this. Grab an English muffin. Put it on there. I'm just going to do 3 at the moment. I don't want to overcrowd the pan. And this pan, this skillet actually overhangs the burner a little bit, so I try to keep them in the middle. Then I put the lid on. And you'll see it eventually fog up, and that means there's condensation and it's cooking. Set my timer for 3 minutes, and then I will come back and check on them. But like I said, because it's the first pan, I don't know if 3 minutes will be enough. My 3-minute timer just went off. You can see the fogginess on top here. So I'm going to check them, see what they look like on the bottom. Okay. They are still pretty doughy. Check this one. Yeah. Like maybe a little bit brown, but I can still, they're still dough. They're not even baked yet or cooked, whatever word you want to use. So I'm gonna put this back on. And again, because this is my first pan, it's different. So maybe I'm thinking probably 2 more minutes. So I'll be back in 2 minutes. Let's check them now. They're still pretty doughy. Let me flip it over and show you. All right, that's not terrible. A little bit of brown here. So I'm going to flip them. You can use your fingers or just flop them. It's not that hot, so I can use my fingers, and I don't want to burst any bubbles. Whoop. So they seemed cooked through enough. Hang on, let me move the camera. So from my experience, they are cooked through enough that by cooking them on the other side, they will go the whole way through. Something to keep in mind as well is it will depend entirely on the thickness of your English muffin. The thicker it is, the longer it will take to cook, and we need to do the temperature on low because if we do it too high, the outside will cook but the inside will still be a dough ball. So again, it's a little bit of a test in patience. You have to trial and error, but once you figure it out, you'll know what you're doing, or you'll at least know what to look for. Like you can see here, I don't have it mastered, but I understand the general principles, and so as I'm cooking them, I can figure out how much more time they need or pull them off or whatever. So hopefully the thought process is helpful, even though I don't have exact numbers to give you. We'll see. It has been 2 minutes on this side. Let's see what we have. Again, lots of condensation. Sometimes when you pull the lid up, you will have some beads of liquid. These are looking pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna flip this one over so you can see what the other side looks like. There we have some browning. It looks like a real English muffin. Amazing. The other thing I check is the sides. If the sides are obviously doughy, that means the inside is not cooked. But these are solid. Let's see. Yeah, I think that one's cooked through. Onto the cooling rack. Let's check the next one. Again, they're not that hot. So that side is maybe, no, it's cooked through. And this one's pretty dark on this side. I can actually smell that. And the side is cooked through. So this one's also done. On to the next ones. Now my pan is very warm because it just cooked all of those. So my next round will cook much more quickly. Actually, I'm gonna turn the temperature down just slightly because I know it's already plenty warm. Go. And the lid goes right on to trap that condensation and cook them the whole way through. And then we just do it all over again. It's been almost 3 minutes. I just turned the timer off, but I'm starting to smell something burny, so let's check. Yep, okay, that's pretty dark on the bottom. Can you see that? Yep, it's pretty dark. Not completely burnt, totally edible, but yeah, see, that's also pretty dark. This is what I tried to tell you not to do, but maybe that's a good lesson. Filming yourself is very humbling. So again, they're a little bit dark, but totally fine. I'm going to turn the temperature down a little more, put the lid back on, and set my timer again. I probably will still do 2 minutes because I lowered the temperature, but feel free to check on them frequently and use your other senses. If it looks like they're starting to get dark or you can smell something, check them. 2 minutes later, let's check. Yep, that's pretty dark. But it looks cooked through. Let's check this one. This one totally puffed up on this side, like it's uneven sitting in the pan. Let's see. Because there's a slit in this one, you can even see on the inside, and it does look cooked through. So again, English muffin. Last one. The sides look good. The top is brown but not burnt. Looks good to me. Last round. Ideally, we would wait until these are 100% cool to cut them, but I'm excited to show you and excited to eat them. I don't think I can keep my kids away from them much longer.
They're soft, still a little warm. They would be perfect with some jam, some butter, anything you want. We like to make them into sandwiches of any kind, breakfast sandwiches, regular sandwiches, you name it. They're delicious.